Hello, everybody. My name is Essence Frazier from Cheney University of Pennsylvania, and I'm going to be discussing with you guys autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder is going to be applied in the sense of how it can affect the quality of education that young children in the United States receive. I will be discussing 5 different abstracts in order of those that I find the most interesting and I'm the most eager to read to the one that, it applies, but yet it's not really the most interesting thing to me. So the first abstract that I have here is by a gentleman, I believe, named Durkin. And he and several other researchers did a study talking about the association between socioeconomic status, SES for those who don't know, and the prevalence of autism spectrum disorder. So, with this, they took several 8-year-old children and put them under surveillance where they were trying to see if there was any type of correlation, if you will, between the type of social economic status that they were being exposed to and how that messed with their autism spectrum disorder. And to not read the abstract verbatim, pretty much to me, what it seemed like the conclusion was that there was some type of association between the two, like there was a higher prevalence in the autism spectrum disorder in these kids when they were exposed to different socioeconomic statuses. So I thought that was the most interesting, honestly, just because being an African American woman myself, I think it is important to see how a disorder such as autism spectrum disorder is affected just by being black and not living in the most well-off neighborhood. So when I came across this article, I knew immediately this is the first one I want to find more research and understand a little bit more, because the abstract really didn't give me like a full sense and I'm only speculating based off of that. However, I do think it is a good getaway into other discussions that I will be talking about later in this video. My next abstract is talking about the study that was by the researcher named Hill and several others that looked into 62 different court cases occurring in 2009 from the LexisNexis database regarding students that were aged between 3 and 21 that were all on the spectrum of autism spectrum disorder and how they were in violations of the Individuals with Disability Education Act, or IDEA for short. So, from the abstract alone, it does not provide much information. However, I do feel as though it is an important concept to look into, because I think it's just heart-wrenching when you see kids that are on the spectrum of any disorder and they are being unfairly treated, especially when it comes to education, which is something that is very big and crucial to me. And he also compared what they found with previous cases and looked at, the increase in cases from this database and talked with parents and really just tried to figure it out. So this is my second most interesting article because I want to know what these parents are saying. I could only imagine being the parent of a, child with, that's on the spectrum of autism spectrum disorder and they're found in violation or they have been violated somehow by, the IDEA Act. So I think it should be an important and pretty cool thing to look more into. In this third abstract, it again talks about the word prevalence, and this researcher, Bolivar, I think it's pronounced, and his colleagues, they did a study looking at preschool students and how they were prevalence and like how they were really treated prior to new policy changes a couple of years ago. So by doing this analysis, they were able to see that a lot of these kids were not getting the proper therapies that they needed to accommodate them for their disorders. And parents actually noted on that, was like, hey, listen, my child really only receives most of these services in school, but outside of that, they're not getting it. And while, yes, it's great they were having some of these services in school, people don't think of the importance of the home life and how that can really affect a child's, development and their education if they're only getting their proper treatment half times of the day. The fourth article that I was the most interested in researching and learning more about was by a individual with the last name Boswell, and this individual and several others, they did more of an analysis of previous done research, and they looked at one state's records of how they were diagnosing and treating children that fell on the autism spectrum disorder scale. And by doing this and looking at different indicators that could affect, how these children are treated, they realized like this is really important, because if you do not go over again how a state is doing, then sometimes you can miss out on like where they're lacking and like where they lower their standards at. And we're supposed to care about all children and whatnot, especially the children that have these disorders that they cannot change. I think that this article was phenomenal just based off the abstract alone, and it really piqued my interest, and I am eager to continue to do more research into it and really figure out the full extent of what they found by overlooking well, not overlooking, but by analyzing previous work done. My last article, which honestly I was the least interested by, but it did relate to the topic of education and autism spectrum disorder, was this abstract by Cooter, I believe is his last name. And this article was another like review of other work, and really just looking at how programs and services were designed to meet the needs of students that suffered from autism spectrum disorder. This article really narrowed down its searches and wanted to be selective in what articles they examined. And they came down with a few, and the review identified methods that have been found to be effective in supporting students with autism spectrum disorder in higher education settings. So, college, post grad, and all of that, which is very important, but I feel like I want to focus more on the levels that lead up to that. So, your middle school, your elementary school, your high school, because if your development is not correct there is a higher chance that your development, especially when it comes to education, will be flawed when it comes to post-secondary schools. So, in conclusion, that is my 5 abstracts. They are very brief. All of them were quite short. However, it just gives you a insight into what I'm thinking about for the future and my interest in the autism spectrum disorder. Thank you.